Hello, everyone. Welcome to the last day of Native American Heritage Month. My name is Runningwater. I belong to the Cheyenne and Mescalero Apache tribes. I was born and reared on the Mescalero Reservation in southern New Mexico, but I now reside on Tongva ancestral land here in Los Angeles. And it's such a pleasure to be here representing a really vibrant and exciting community of storytellers who are working in our industry. I myself have just spent 20 years at Sundance Institute and have now departed for a producing deal to work with Amazon Studios. And I am now excited to just be serving our community in a new, exciting way after 20 years of working in cinema specifically. And so today's panel is really going to be a discussion with some great artists to really think about, Native representation in our entertainment industry. And along with our partners who brought us together, I'd like to thank Disney and also IllumiNative. And we also want to touch on a particular guide, which is called The Time Is Now, The Power of Native Representation and Entertainment, which was just released this month as well. And we'll dive into that eventually. But I just wanted to, first of all, just say welcome. Basically saying in my Apache language, it's really good that we can be here together and be digital together, I guess I should say. I would like for our guests to introduce themselves individually and give us, maybe the lands that they're calling in from, your own tribal affiliations, and the role or roles. I think we have quite a few multi-hyphenates on our panel today. So tell us also what aspects of Native storytelling you're involved with. Erica, why don't you kick us off?
My name's Erica. I'm just so happy to be here. I am a member of the Seneca Cayuga Nation. I'm actually calling or zooming in from my reservation in Oklahoma, here visiting family. So excited to be here chatting with you from Oklahoma. I am a writer and director, working mostly in feature film as well as television. And yeah, I'm just super happy to see some familiar faces here and excited to chat with you all today.
Bobby, your camera ready. You go next.
Oh, me? I couldn't possibly. I'm Betuwashte, friends and relatives. Bobby Wilson, Imachiapiado. I'm Sisseton-Wahpeton, Dakota. You're welcome. And I am phoning in from the homelands of the Tana Autumn Nation and the Yaquis. We won't get into it. I'm a TV writer, comedian, artist. I do all sorts of fun stuff. Yeah. And with that, I will pass.
Kimberley.
Oh. Thank you, Bobby. Thank you, Bird. Thank you, Erica. I'm Kimberley Norris Guerrero. I am an actor, writer. I have given up and call myself a storyteller now, contemporary storyteller. I am coming to you from Riverside, California, which is a traditional kind of homelands of the Cahuilla, the Gabrielino, the Serrano, and the Cahuilla people. And I also am a professor here at UC Riverside, where I am the current artistic director of our theater program. So it's really been an extraordinary experience trying to decolonize theater and filmmaking here at UC Riverside. And I'm just thrilled to join you all today in this conversation.
Thanks. We're going to touch on that decolonization thing. Well, as I mentioned, all of us have really, I think, varying kind of roles in which we have participate in storytelling for the screen, I guess I should say. And, I was just commenting earlier to a group that, we're kind of, we're kind of having a moment that I hope becomes, a lasting cultural shift in American popular culture. It's kind of like we have Native American created TV shows on the air. We have Native American movies in theaters. And, it's so exciting. I think for those of us who come from our community, it's like we've been creating and we've been screening and sharing our own work on a lot of different levels. But I feel like for the first time, this kind of barrier between what, American audiences see is really being perforated, for the first time in terms of national popular culture. And I think that IllumiNative has really kind of done, quite amazing research in terms of trying to understand the trends and trying to understand, kind of these systemic issues of why, we continue as the original peoples of this land continue to remain invisible in the eyes of most Americans. And that kind of really goes back to two particular key points. There are many points, but two particular ones are that, in the United States educational curriculum, we're only taught about up through maybe even the junior high, just in terms of national education curriculum standards. And we're also never taught past the 1900s. And so if you think of all the generations of Americans who have grown up not knowing that we actually do exist as modern, contemporary, thriving peoples, that's a really deep issue. And especially when you look at, if we look at an industry, an entertainment industry, which dominates, marketplaces around the world, and that we see that these people who are the decision makers for this industry have been educated by that same system. So therefore, there's a huge disconnect and a huge kind of structural barrier when it comes to why we don't see more Native American representation across all media forms. And then also, and that leads to a level of invisibility. And so when you have an education failure as well as an invisibility compounded and on our screens in American culture, it really creates a deep systemic issue. I myself am very fortunate. I live in a world of nothing but Indigenous storytelling. That's all I read in terms of scripts. That's all I look at in terms of films from around the world and the past work that I've done as a curator. And I think that, I wish everyone could see what I've been able to see and what I continue to see in terms of how beautifully and innovatively Indigenous peoples are really representing themselves, on screen through film and television and a whole bunch of other mediums. But, I just wanted to know, from each one of you, given that you're creatives working in multiple roles within the industry, like what is your path and what has your work been like? Kimberley, I have to say, I do remember you when I was living in New York City back in the 90s, seeing a Native woman on Seinfeld. And that to me was one of the greatest iconic moments of that first chip, into that glass, ceiling or whatever you want to call it. Why don't we start with you? Tell us about your journey and how things are going.
Boy, it really was. It was a huge crack in that ceiling. I didn't realize it at the time. I just knew it felt so good to be, I kind of believe in that old adage, luck is when preparation meets opportunity. And I had worked so hard as an actor, to be ready. And I was not ever given the opportunity to go out for roles that were anything but Native American roles. And so there were so few and far between that, when the Seinfeld opportunity came up, and walking in there, and to my knowledge, I was the only Indigenous woman that auditioned for that role. Now, I don't know the folks that were in the room, but we have a very, for those of you that are watching, we have a very tight community. We know each other. It's a living document. It's a living community. It's an organism. And so, this means that the new ones that are coming out, and I mean, by new, they could be 17, 18, 19 years old, but they could also be 50 or 60 or 70 or 80 years old. And so our community is constantly evolving, our community of actors and performers. And so the other three women that were in, that callback, I knew they weren't from our community, and a couple of them even dressed in stereotypical like buckskin and feathers for a Seinfeld role. It was just like, I don't see many of those folks walking around New York City like that. But so it was just that moment of being able to walk in and know that I can not only embody the words and the comedy, that I had the craft and the knowledge of our people and the embodied knowledge of our history. And so I think that's where the comedy comes from, because it meant something to Winona, like it meant something to Kimberley. And so I think that's kind of when magic happens. And so come full circle, that was 1993, I believe, when that flash on our screen. I think it was December of 1993. And I haven't gotten to do comedy since until last year on Rutherford Falls. And then earlier this year on Reservation Dogs. And I love comedy. I live for comedy, you know? And so it's just, it's been a very long fight and a very long journey to make. But as you mentioned at the top of this, Bert, is that, you know, we're having a moment, and I do believe it's a cultural shift, and it's something that we've all been hungry for, and that we're all really enjoying. And I do believe it's, you know, I believe story is medicine and storytelling is ceremony. And so to have the first peoples of this land being able to be a part, you know, of that storytelling, I think it's going to change things for the better.
That's exciting. Well, Bobby, I think you and Erica, you know, I know that you're both in different writers' rooms, and, you know, you're writing in drama, you're writing in comedy. Bobby, you're also a performer appearing on screen in Rutherford Falls. What, like, how do you, that's why you're always camera ready. Like, how do you see kind of like your coming up in the industry right at this moment? Because, you know, you were part of in the performance troupe 1491s, and then you've just been thrust into this whole new exciting moment. Like, how are things going?
Oh, how are things going? Damn, they're going pretty good. I'll tell you what. No, you know, I had this conversation a lot because with this comedy troupe that I'm a part of, the whole of us met in 2010, and we have been making videos for YouTube and going on tour all across Indian country with our live performances from between then and then like 2019, I think, was our last live show together before we were all thrust in to the Hollywood space kind of at the same time, just about. And it's been fantastic. It has been like kind of a long road, because when it started out just as comedians performing live sketch comedy, we always knew, working as a collective, that coming together and making videos should eventually lead to film and television, and it always has to keep growing. And so, like, I always tell people, get yourself a crew that has a whiteboard, because like we would get together a couple times a year for like our own creative retreat, and sometimes it was funded, sometimes it was not. We would just get together and kind of hash out like what the next year could look like, what are our goals as a collective, what do we want to do. And there were so many times between 2010 2019 that we had meetings with production companies, we had meetings with studio executives, and we were told time and time again that there's no market for Indian stories. There's like, we can't sell that. What is Native American comedy? You know, was the other question that we got a lot. And so we got approached a lot of times, and nothing ever really panned out. And then we finally got together, were commissioned by the Oregon Shakespeare Festival to write a play called Between Two Knees, which sold out time and time again. People freaking seem to really either super enjoy it or super hate it enough to write to the theater and tell them that they'll never be seeing another show there ever again, which was great. I love that. And I'm not being facetious. I genuinely love that. That was fantastic. And I mean, it sold out so much that it got an extended run. They had to add a bunch of new shows to it. It got to play for like another month. It's going to be in Yale in their first season back from the pandemic stuff that we're still in. But downer. No, and you know, throughout the entire time, and this is something that I talked to Sierra Tiller Ornelas a lot about, the showrunner for Rutherford Falls, is like, just creating things, just making things, just keep doing what you do. And that's exactly what I did. Besides working with the collective, it was also like I have an Instagram and I like to post jokes. I like to make funny posts. And that was where Sierra Teller Nellis reached out to me and asked if I had a writing sample and any interest in ever writing for TV. I was like, are you kidding me? Of course. God dang, tell me where to send it. And then I got staffed on her show. And then I went to Reservation Dogs right after that. And then I went to Marvel's Echo series after that. And now both of the shows that I was staffed on and also performed in are in season 2. So it's going pretty good. Oh, and I saw
congratulations. Lunch is on you next time. Erica, so you and I have a really interesting background and connection. You were coming out of the corporate world, working in kind of in the magazine world, right? Branded content, video, storytelling, documentary making, and you wanted to move into fiction. And so you came through the Sundance Institute Indigenous program and now the feature film program to really make that transition. And now you're in writers' rooms and developing movies and series. And so tell us a little bit more about that journey for you.
Yeah, I was thinking about this earlier today. Just here in the backyard, I had convinced my mother to buy a VHS recorder many years ago at a Goodwill. And I was the bossy girl of the neighborhood and had made all the neighborhood kids get together to do my plays and to perform my plays. And I was realizing, kind of thinking back on that that's been 30 years since I was that little girl in the backyard. And I'm just now arriving at the point where I'm writing and directing for a living. And I think, just to echo what Bobby was saying, I just kept doing it ever since I picked up that first VHS recorder. And even if I wasn't working on the passion projects and was working in a lot of toxic environments in the corporate world, on my own time, I found the space to find community and to find those whiteboards and to find my own voice and continue to push, because ever since then, I've had the dream to be a storyteller and to be a maker, and it does feel like there's a sea change happening. There's so much more. When I premiered my film at Sundance in 2020, I'll never forget, during one of the press junkets, one of the journalists who have credentials who were there recording, they were like, wow, when we watched your film, it was just so surprising. Like, I didn't realize that there were Native Americans in America. And I was like, I just sat there and I was like, I don't know how to answer or respond to this person who's basically saying that I'm not in existence, and that this culture and community that I've just made this modern story about was so surprising. And that was in 2020. So there's still, while the doors are slowly creaking open and we're getting more gigs and we're finally getting paid for the work that we're doing, some of us, there are so many that still are on the grind. There's still so much left in the day-to-day, conversations in response to the industry, that we still have so many more conversations to have. Yeah. But I kind of thought of that question and realized, like, well, the only way that this changes is for us to continue to make things. And I think this year, with the success of Rutherford Falls and Reservation Dogs and, the upcoming AMC series that I worked on, Dark Winds, like, there's a lot of stuff that's coming and is yet to be written and yet to be expressed. But I think there are challenges, but what keeps it, I guess, me motivated is like to show up every day in a room with Bobby and other people like Bobby and myself, and working as a group of Native people collaborating, as opposed to being the one. And for so many years, that was what it was. You were always the one, and you were always paid like a consultancy fee, or you were brought on at the end to like fix some really racist stuff that had been created. And it not only was it traumatic, but it didn't pay, and you're also alone in your work. And so what a great time to be working in this industry, to finally be able to collaborate and to make things with other people in our own voice and, you know, be compensated for that work. And I just hope that we get to keep doing more of it.
Hear, hear. You guys are both touching on some points that I want to follow up on. And I want to tell our audience, so I hope you'll forgive my lighting here. I'm trying to be dramatic as if being a Scorpio isn't dramatic enough. But, you know, Bobby, you mentioned, as a fellow Scorpio, like this notion that Native work wasn't marketable, or that there wasn't an audience for it. And I think that we're kind of seeing this disproved. And I feel like part of the myopia was rooted in that, you know, miseducation, for one, that I spoke of earlier, but also kind of this myopia that in terms of, you know, who was deciding what work would get seen. And I experienced this working in indie film, you know, first as kind of my primary point of reference. But, you know, it's kind of like there was always this notion that only Native stories are only for Native people, and that because our percentage in the US demography, you know, is over at that, you know, over the years, we've vacillated maybe, you know, 3 million, 5 million. I've heard that upcoming census numbers, we're going to be hitting about 10 million. So this kind of notion that Native stories were only marketable, that the transaction, you know, that could potentially happen was only so small with such a small percentage of people. But I feel like what Res Dogs and, you know, Rutherford Falls and Night Raiders, which is out in theaters right now, you know, Wild Indian, which was just out in theaters as well. You know, I feel like they're kind of disproving this, but because I think that Native stories are for everybody, you know, and I just wondered if any of you had a comment on that.
No, they're for me. They're only for this panel.
Well, I guess I should say this: when you're writing, are you writing for a Native audience? Are you writing for everybody? I guess kind of like that would be the interesting point of departure.
Yeah, I mean, there's like a prideful little Indian dude in me that wants to be like, no, I only write this for myself. But no, the truth is, it starts out like, do I like this? And then the thought or the greater conversation of like what impact this is going to have on America, on like all of the larger audiences that are going to be seeing this stuff, and also knowing full well that much like Erica experienced in 2020, to this day, I mean, like, I got this long ass braid, I got this crazy horse nose, like people come up to me and they're like, are you Native American? Still happens all the time. Like people genuinely just like do not know anything about us, because as you mentioned, it's not really taught in schools about who we are, or represented in television up until very recently, when all of us that are here present started to really jump, like getting flung into this and pushing it harder and harder. So yeah, the stories that we are telling are stories of America, of other people, and I think that it's been proven now that they have a broad appeal. And that's all I have to say about that.
Erica or Kimberley, like given kind of, you know, I think that on your creative levels, what do you think the industry has to learn in terms of the success of, you know, the 2 television shows out now, the others that are going to be forthcoming? Are there any lessons to be learned?
Yeah, I mean, I feel and my personal approach, and I think Erica and Bobby and yourself too, Bert, feel it. I mean, we're in show business. We get that it's a business, and business means folks watching, folks engaging, you know? And so there's something about indigeneity, and you use the word innovation, you know, and adaptation. There's just such a joy with which we come at story. And I think an ease, I think without us even thinking about it, we can write as insiders for outsiders and the insiders at the same time. Like, I'll never forget sitting in the theater in Santa Fe, New Mexico. I just graduated from UCLA and needed to get away from Los Angeles for a while. And I moved out there, and I was sitting in the theater watching Smoke Signals, laughing my ass off, you know, and the folks, you know, the non-Native folks around me looking at me, horrified that I would be laughing at, you know, somebody driving a car down this, road backwards. I'm like, that's funny. Just like, really, that's not funny to you. And I mean, I get it, but it's just, it's just this beautiful mesh of, I think when you watch these shows, that it's a kind of an all in. It's good storytelling. I know in my tribe, I think I forgot to mention my own people. I'm an enrolled Colville member. I'm Wenatchee and Okanagan, and also Salish Kootenai from Montana. And we have the Chinook dances, and the Chinook time comes, and the storytellers come on. And you could go for as long as you could keep the people entertained. And then you basically got the Apollo hook. Right? There's like, get off the stage, just time. And, it's like the great storytellers could go for 12, 13, 14 hours straight,
Yeah.
And so that was, I just think that we all kind of intuitively have that. And so I do think that's something that our industry can learn, is to learn to trust us as creatives, as writers, as directors, as above the line folks, as well as when you put us in front of the camera, is that we're going to figure out a way to make it work. To build that very dynamic, very nuanced, very layered story and characters and performance. And yeah, trust us. I think we're kind of badass. We've been storytelling we've been storytelling in this place for a long time. So let us do it.
I agree. Erica, I want to know if you experienced this being a writer director. I've always told native screenwriters and directors that one, they carry a very heavy burden of having to deconstruct 100+ years of cinema, of misrepresentation of us. And not only do they have to do that, but they also have to innovate and try to create something authentic and something new, especially in the contemporary space, let alone futuristic sci-fi and all those things. But how has your experience been in terms of carrying that burden? Do you see it as a burden?
Yeah, I mean, it's really hard, and it definitely is a burden that exists, and it exists every day. I mean, there's not a day that doesn't go by where there isn't a touch point of discomfort around having to either educate gatekeepers or like do my own research that I'm not sure about to then back up the claim that I already know to be true, but to prove that. And I think, what Kimberley was saying about trust is so important. Whatever came out of this Me Too movement or this like cultural shift that is happening, networks and studios and producers are realizing that if they want to tell these stories, they have to allow Native people to tell them. But there's still this like death grip on a lot of it. And we also haven't been given a lot of these opportunities up until this point. So some of us haven't ever been showrunners and are being thrust into showrunning, or haven't ever been leading rooms or writing. And so there's this like, very weird balance that has to happen where we need to be given the freedom, but we also need to be given opportunities in which we're going to succeed, and not just being thrown into hyper like leadership levels without having some sort of mentorship or, environment in which we can be cultivated into those roles, because we absolutely have the capabilities to do those. And I think that it is a struggle. And, I look to people who have been working before me, I look to Sterling and to a bunch of other folks who have really been at these touch points for a lot longer and pushing a lot harder, and so much gratitude to those folks, and realizing that now that I'm here, it's my job to try and ease them open even more for those that are coming up behind. And, sometimes you just have to have really difficult conversations and say to someone that's racist, right? And it's hard to tell someone that they're being racist, but you have to, and we have to, in these moments where you can be like, we would never wear that, we would never say that, we would never do that. And if you include that, it's going to be inauthentic. My short film is a modern Native American story about a woman who's an educator, and she's helping this young boy through a hard day. And at the end of it, he's had this fit, and she's sitting with him, and they're having this quiet moment. And I kept just getting this note, well, she should hug him. And I was like, this woman, this teacher would never touch this child. Like in a million years, she would never. So they're going to ruin, you know, the authenticity as soon as we take her out of her, you know, hard, gruff, but loving and supportive Indigenous womanity, or whatever you want to call it, would be totally ruined if we followed all of those rules. And the authenticity that makes our Indigenous storytelling so beautiful would be taken away from that, and it would just then be this lukewarm, watered down version. And so I would just say that, you know, we have to keep pushing, keep standing up for what we know is the truth, and hopefully eventually, as it's been easier for us recently, it will continue to be easier, and people will continue to respond to the authenticity and the truth of the stories that we're telling. And that's why we're telling them. And that's why we should be trusted to tell them.
Yeah, well, your comments on authenticity are kind of bringing me back to, you know, the guide that IllumiNative issued, you know, The Time Is Now. And in that guide, one of the things I consulted on the drafting of it, but one of the things that, you know, that many of us in the industry who have been here for, you know, a couple decades, maybe, started when we were 12, but, you know, what is that this notion that most of Hollywood and all of the historical productions have always kind of relied upon is the cultural consultant, you know, the dreaded cultural consultant role. And really some of us began, whenever I started getting asked, like, do you know a cultural consultant? Do you know a cultural consultant? I feel like going back to Standing Rock 4 years ago, we kind of started seeing a lot more. We were in the national news, we were on the front page of the New York Times, which took a lot of effort. And thanks to, you know, water protectors and everyone who supported that movement to get us, you know, on that kind of coverage, standing up for what's right. But, you know, I started noticing a lot more industry reaching out, wanting more contacts to talent, but most often it was always in that space, you know, the cultural consultant. And so one of the things that we really, some colleagues and I, Heather Ray among them and others, you know, we really started trying to draw a hard line just to kind of say, you know what, that role has been done. That's a powerless role. It's checking a box. You know, it's not really truly making a commitment to creating an authentic story. Like, you need to hire a producer, get a Native person, a producer role, capacity that actually is a part of the production formally, and that can really help guide, again, you know, maybe the authenticity of a project. And, you know, and it's been met with different, you know, different reactions, but it's been great to see kind of the acceleration of, you know, a lot more of our producers, I think, really coming on board in projects. A lot of them which are being told through a non-Indigenous lens, but really moving them a bit closer to some kind of, you know, authenticity. But I just wanted to know, as creatives, what are the key ingredients for making an authentic story? Kimberly, you kind of touched on this earlier.
What a great end. And this guide is such a gift because there has been so much thought, and I'm sure prayer and embodied experience put into this guide. And consultancy, yes. I mean, it's, you know, having been at this for so long, as an actor in front of the camera, I was a cultural consultant. You know, I was having to lobby for this is not, and of course, playing so many different nations, and having been present in so many of our communities, working with our youth from the time I was, you know, 20 years old, you know, saying, this is not the way this nation would have done this ceremony. This is not exactly what you said, Erica. They wouldn't wear this. They wouldn't do this. And having to advocate from the place, you know, of the talent, and in finding that gracious diplomatic way to do it, but also be very firm, and even having to do it within the casting process, you know, of being able to say, hey, we'd like for you to come. I mean, again, keep in mind, folks, I'm getting my other colleagues who are non-Native are working. I am having to wait for the phone call for the one Native American female role that might come out, you know, that my 6 friends and I all go on together. And then even within that, you know, that the crumbs that are falling from the table going, oh, this crumb is poison, folks. We gotta do something about this crumb. There's some stereotypes, and harmful stereotypes, or harmful stories that are being repeated, violence against women, or just, again, the drunk or the incompetent, it just goes on and on. And so even having to, within that, coming back to a casting office and saying, hey, I love that you're including this character. Here's some ideas. And I've actually written on shows. Had I known back then, I would have gotten my WGA credit a long time ago, but I've actually rewritten entire scenes that I felt like were so much stronger. And the folks, above the line felt so as well. It was like, because it was bringing that. So it's just, and then I often lost battles as well. And some of the battles that I lost meant that I stepped away from the production. Or I took myself out of the casting process because they weren't willing to bend. And so I do think that the key to authenticity is exactly what you said, is bring the Native folks in the room, bringing on the writers, bringing in the directors, bringing in producer, and then again, not in name only, not a producer in name only. So you have a Native person on board, but in a meaningful way that you are willing to listen. I think it's one of the greatest keys to building authenticity is the power to listen. And it's not a trait that any of us, myself included, it's just not lauded in this day and age that we live in, where everybody wants to tweet, do this and be heard and be seen, but it's like to sit and listen. It's a beautiful indigenous thing that if we're blessed with elders in our lives, they teach us, but also it's just a human thing. And I think it's needed and crucial, and it gives, I know I've been talking for a second, but I do think the taste level of our audiences is so high right now, and they can taste bullshit now, and it's like you throw a Native storyline or a Native whatever, they can taste it. They're like, I call bullshit, So it's like, it's a good, again, we were talking about good business practice. This is just a good business model, is to bring the folks in the room and to really listen once they're in there, and not just one, because y'all back me up on this. You could find that one. Beware the Native person that says, I speak on behalf of all Native people and all indigenous people in the world. I am the one that has the answers. Like, beware folks like that. So maybe that's a reason to have two people, or to have, folks, if you are going to bring that one person online, that you can come to anybody on this panel or whatever, and we can say, oh yeah, I know this, I've worked with this person, they're legit, like they're going to do a good job, and if you need somebody that's maybe a better fit, we could recommend that person. So I think relationship and networking is also important.
I think that's an interesting point that you bring in terms of, like, rather than having that one person. And Erica, you were saying also how great it is to collaborate with other Native people. I would think that, both you and Bobby, in terms of being in the writers' rooms that you've been in on episodic programs, there must be a really fascinating tension and friction that comes in terms of, like, breaking a story, or, kind of like the workings of a room to kind of create, something, authentic. Like, can you describe any kinds of scenarios like that?
I just think it's so much fun. Like, when I think of the rooms that I've been in, where I've gotten to be in the rooms with all Native writers, there's just this, we were just celebrating the holiday here with my family, and I was looking around, and it's like all of my aunties and my uncles and my mom and grandma, they're all like getting louder and louder as they tell a story. And we've heard the story a million times, and it always changes, and there's different plot points and all this stuff. And that's the way a writer's room feels with a bunch of Native people, is that ideas are getting thrown out. We're constantly teasing each other, and our voices are getting louder, and we're building and building and building until, as a group, we find this like kernel of truth that you don't really realize who said the first thing and who said the second thing and where it ended up. And there's also, and maybe this is just because I've been in some really great writers' rooms with great Indigenous writers, but there's also this feeling of like, there's not as much ego compared to a lot of the other rooms I've been in. Now, don't get me wrong, we talk shit all day, and there's never an end in which we're not making fun of or teasing each other. but there's not this weird feeling of like competition where it's like, oh, if I don't get a good idea in by the end of the day. I mean, there are days where a writer might not say any ideas and then the next day show up with a beautiful idea. There's this like real sense of camaraderie and like, you know, I've got something I want to call Bobby about here the next week to ask him about an experience of some, you know, and like I feel comfortable in wishing success for the fellow writers in the room and the other people working in the industry. And that is sincere. And when we say that we all succeed together, I have yet to be taken down at the knees by another Indigenous writer and in vulnerable positions where I could have been. But we all know when someone's having a bad day or needs to be pushed a little harder or might not be quite there, and you can help them get there. And that, I think, you know, in the industry has really tripped up some of the networks and some of the people when they realize, oh, they talk to each other. Or like, we can't take these two writers and pit them against each other because they're texting or they're calling each other afterwards because we don't feel that competition. We actually cheer for each other. And so I would just say that, you know, I just enjoy it so much and hope that we can keep that family moving forward. And I know nothing's ever perfect. And as Indigenous people, we're not perfect either. Like there are the bullshitters and there are all the, you know, like Kimberley was saying, there all are those, but what a special and great time to be collaborating with people. And it truly is a joy when we are the ones in control of the stories.
You're bringing up some other interesting, I feel like cultural, what I would say, maybe redefinitions or reinterpretations of, I think, these very traditional processes within, you know, the entertainment Hollywood system, which has, you know, historically, I think, maybe embraced, you know, white supremacy, hierarchical Western European notions, you know, of that influence capitalism and so many other aspects, you know, that bring stories to the screen. And I feel like, you know, just through the work that Sundance Institute, you know, has created, including, you know, your film, Erica, helped support. It's also one, it's been about great kernels of story, countering historic narratives, creating something authentic and innovative, but also to get something made, the whole production model has had to be reconsidered. You know, it's kind of like, it's more of a flat-based model. It's more like looking at building cultural competency, you know, around, you know, all the non-Indigenous people who are involved in an Indigenous production to understand whose land they're on, what's their history, what's it. And so I think that, to me, that's kind of the interesting place that I think Indigenous and Native storytelling is really going to have a huge impact, I think, on our industry, is because, like you said, also, after, you know, the tragic murder of George Floyd and so many other Black Americans that continue to this day, you know, it's like being in this kind of moment of racial reckoning that we've been going through, the touting of BIPOC, the recognition that, oh, the I in BIPOC actually means Indigenous, and, you know, and people being willing to acknowledge that, you know, Indigenous is their blind spot, right? And so I think that's where we're seeing a lot of movement and a lot of kind of pathways starting to clear, to open, that's, you know, really leading to the success of so many projects. But I just wondered if anyone else, I think, you know, Kimberley, you talked earlier about, you know, decolonizing theater, again, another historically Western, you know, frame of storytelling, while we had our own theater, you know, in the Americas. I wonder if anyone else had a comment on kind of these reinterpretations or redefinitions of, you know, kind of traditional or historic American practices that we can inspire.
If I may.
Please do.
You know, there's this thing about, like, from the writer's room standpoint, it feels like one of the more Indigenous jobs that I've ever had. And I have worked at some Indian orgs in my life. So much of it has been like just sitting in a room full of other Indians and philosophizing about the shit that we all care about, the things that we're all insecure about, the things that have given us the deepest sorrows and the greatest joys. And I think that, like, that's kind of just how storytelling should be happening. That's how it should be developing. And I think that when it does happen that way, you can actually see, you can quantify the success of it. I am talking, of course, about Reservation Dogs, because I mean, shit. I mean, they just won the Gotham Award last night. Freaking, like, the numbers are in on like viewership, like Hulu, FX. They got so many new subscribers, and like on that systemic business end of it. I mean, I just want to go back in time to all of those freaking people who told me that there ain't no market for it, and be like, you know what, motherfucker? Sorry,
like
this is
now.
Disney. I know you guys don't like cussing around or whatever.
No, I think you're, you know, you're right. It's kind of like, you know, it's being able to kind of, and you know, and there are those people who've taken the risk, I would say, on the industry side, you know, the people who've taken the risk to greenlight something like Reservation Dogs, or to greenlight something like Rutherford Falls, you know. But also, I think in order for that to happen, you know, we really have had to, you know, collaborate with some really strong allies. You know, Ed Helms, you know, Taika Waititi, you know, I'm currently developing a show with Ava DuVernay, who's another great ally to the Indigenous community. And it's like through those allyship, the people who really kind of help, you know, take on the risk by putting their names and their reputations on the line for us to have, you know, a moment, you know, to really prove so much of this history wrong is really important and really valuable. So I just want to say thank you to all of our great allies and those of you who continue to champion us, but also to, you know, who are really disproving, you know, previously presumed business, you know, assumptions. What is it they say about assumptions?
I'll text it to you.
Okay. I wanted to ask, you know, that like there's, you know, there are a lot more announcements of stories and development. I can, you know, on my hand, I think I can think of probably, you know, 4 or 5, maybe even more. I feel like there's more interest. I will say, for the first time ever in my life in the industry, like I have so many people coming at me from the industry, all with projects that they want me to consider being a part of. And the overwhelming, it's refreshing on one level, but it's a reminder also of the work that we have yet to do. And because I would say probably 95% of those projects coming towards me, maybe this is happening to you guys as well, are all period pieces. They're all 1800s regurgitations of Dances with Wolves glory days. And it seems that like there's so many people who are so stuck, you know, in that era. How do you guys respond to, I know you guys are getting hit up with these things. How do you guys respond?
Well, I just had some really honest conversations with my, you know, representation, and I was just like, these are the things that depress me when you send them to me. And you know, I'm in a privileged position in which I have gatekeepers that can be like, okay, she's not going to tell a story that's about this. And you know, I think it's not just the period pieces, but it's also just like the trauma porn. Like, you know, I just co-wrote and I'm directing a feature film that has missing and murdered Indigenous women as an aspect to it. But it certainly isn't a story where you're seeing a Native woman's body being drug out of a lake. And I'm just like not interested. I'm not interested in reading those projects. I'm not interested in working on those projects. So whether it's the period pieces or just the regurgitated trauma that for whatever reason everyone is fascinated by watching, I just say no. And I think in some cases there's even room to have a conversation with, why are you making this in the first place? And I feel secure enough in my career that I do have those conversations. I have them and I say, this isn't, like, you should reconsider altogether. And I'm hoping that with the success of the shows that we've been talking about and all of our projects that we're at the helm of creating, that stuff will just start to fall to the side, because we'll really focus in on having people from the communities be the authentic voice and be the kernel of the start of the project, as opposed to coming in later. I think one thing that's so great about this guide is that even though it's chapterized and you can really apply a lot of this logic to many parts of what's happening in the industry. And, you know, it's not even like, yes, we can get rid of the term cultural consultant, and we can say, and the industry can say, okay, cultural consultant, bad. And I find that the industry sometimes likes to just like very much like say, okay, I'm not allowed to do this. Well, what I can do is hire a bunch of native writers and have a non-native showrunner. Then I've got writers, they're not cultural consultants, but like, that's just creating a room full of cultural consultants that don't actually have the power to run the show and create the show. So I think like what's so great about this guide is people need to read this guide, but they need to not just look at the words and be like, okay, I have a checklist now of things I'm not going to do. It's the essence, it's the logic, it's the you know, process by which you give your power up to people that deserve to have the power. And so I think that the industry needs to realize that like, we aren't going to be cultural consultants in any manner of the expression. We want to run the shows. We want to write the shows. We want to direct the shows. We want to act in the shows. And that's really the only way that it should ever be happening. So when I get those scripts and I get those stories, I just, if I can, say no and let them know why I'm saying no.
Kimberly, I've heard you tell a story before of like you appearing as an actor in a period piece, and the first thing they did was like, didn't they like rub dirt on your face and like tease your hair to make it look messy? And I mean, I don't mean to laugh, but it's sad.
I mean, that's what we do, right? We laugh at our pain. That's how you know it's authentic.
Yeah.
No, and it just, you know, well, you know, I'm just going to say it. It happened. My very first job out of school. And I was just so proud. Our beautiful Casey Camp Hornack was getting me dressed and ready. And it was a beautiful piece called Sun in the Morning Star for ABC. And I was just, I felt so proud. And we were in Montana. I was born and raised in Oklahoma, but you know, we were in my grandma's near my grandma's territory. And I walked out in this beautiful buckskin dress, and I just felt so proud. And there were, you know, I mean, I think all of the Dances with Wolves people had just come over to our show. So I mean, like cast of thousands of natives. It was just out on the beautiful Montana prairie, and it was just, oh, it was so surreal and beautiful. And so I was being walked to the director, and I felt my ancestors within me. I felt just everything. And I was so humbled and also proud at the same time. And I walked up to the director, and he looked at me and he said, "She's too clean. You're up." Casey and I mean, we didn't know. I mean, we were expecting like, oh, fantastic. Let's move on. Let's get, you know, let's go ahead and move on into the. And so they called for the first AD calls for the Fuller's Earth, the dirt bag, right? The Fuller's Earth bag. And they just begin to just completely, and I, you know, I'm like, what, 21, 22, I'm a young person. I'm like, oh, you know, Custer isn't this dirty. I'm sorry, we're on my land, but Custer is like spotless out there in this, you know, this is so wrong. I had just come from UCLA studying Native American history. Like I knew my history. Like that's a lie. And what was crazy was, right, I just got my MFA in screenwriting about 4 years ago because there was such just a vacuum there was just no Native content out there. And I was like, I'm just going to, by God, go back and spend 2 years writing some stuff, which I have, and it's out there now. But what kicked it off, I'll just be really honest. I did a friend a favor, and they were finishing up the last 2 days of shooting The Revenant. And they had a featured extra role. They're like, we need you to do this. This is very specific. Oh, there's a baby girl. And daggone it if I didn't go. And they had me, even though I was like a, you know, featured extra, they had me in like the big trailer. And they did the same thing. There was the same thing as like, she's too clean. And they paint shit on your, excuse my language. They paint stuff on your teeth, like yellow stuff on your teeth. And I look like Captain Caveman. I mean, I'm really dating myself. I'm like got my like 80s cartoons, but it was like I look like a caveman. And they started like they were putting stuff. I mean, I was livid. They were like literally picking up twigs and crap off the ground and putting in the hair of our elders and of our horses and of our children. And it was just like that was an existential explosion. And I literally left that set, and within the week I was in my MFA program writing screenplays, and I've been writing my ass off ever since, you know, as we all are. And so it's just those things, you know, and then having to educate our young Native men that were on that show going, well, it's just a movie. Our young Native men, it's just a movie. It's like, no, it's only, you know, it's like folks are believing that we were this dirty. You know, a person that's that dirty, there's something, you know, they're not capable. There's an intellectual, you know. So yes, I mean, it's it's glorious. It's so interesting because Bobby and I just got to work together 2 weeks ago on Rutherford Falls, and you know, I usually have, like, I don't know if you can see this, like, because I don't do my nails, and now they're like all grown out, but like the character, she's so put together and so, you know, Erica knows, she's so extra. And it's just such a glorious thing to just be able to walk in that beauty, you know.
Well, it sounded like they needed this resource guide that we're talking about. And a little bit more. Well, you know, I do feel like we are closing up on our time right now, but, you know, I just wanted to offer you guys, I don't know, just maybe some closing words for our audience, for our industry, for our emerging creatives, you know, people who are out there trying to fight the fight. You know, I did want to offer, you know, a couple of points. One, to say that while the amount of content, you know, Native content available has increased, and although there's more diversity in the content, there has not also been an increase in Native representation. You know, I think the study from IllumiNative did, I think last year, is like, I think we're still 0.04%, you know, of images of characters on screen. I think, you know, our 2 new TV shows will probably have a dent in that, but we still have, you know, we still have a ways to go. What are some words of advice or encouragement that you guys can offer?
Well, I was just so inspired by what Kimberly was just saying. I think that what we have to do is, it can't just be reactionary, but it feels that way right now. And I think we're finally getting to this point where we've gone through our MFA programs we're doing, and we can just tap into our truth. And I think, like, just keep making, just keep doing. Like, there's also the flip side of the feedback we get, you know, like I've had notes back like, well, you know, you've got a sex worker in this script, and you've also got a stripper in the script. And I'm like, yeah, well, Native people are sex workers and strippers, and that doesn't mean that we're covered in dirt, right? Like, we have all sorts of lived experiences. And if we only focus on the dirt covered period pieces or the model minorities that some people want us to write because they don't want to be racist by having controversial characters, we're never going to get anywhere. So we just lean into your truth, lean into the characters that you know and that you love and that you want to express. And as long as you're being honest with yourself and working through all that stuff that you have, you're going to find a great release, whether it makes it on the screen or doesn't. Like Bobby said earlier, somebody may come calling and you'll have it ready, and you'll have something that you've worked through ready to show, and you might end up in the writer's room, or you might get published, or you might get out there and get a role in a film or a TV show. So for me, it's always been something that I can't not do. And I always will do it, regardless of whether they're paying me Hollywood money to do it or not. So I'll just keep saving up for, you know, in case they take it away, which I'm always worried of constantly as an Indian. But just keep making and expressing, and find your community. Like I love what Bobby said earlier, find that whiteboard. Who is that group of people that you can surround a blank sheet of paper with and just make stuff with them?
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
I think, like, I was talking to a couple folks about this the other day, which is like on the studio side of things. I can't wait, like the studio and the audience side of it is I can't wait for the day to where it's not like a check mark, you know what I mean? You know what I mean. But for those who don't know what I mean, you know, you don't need just the one Indian show or just the one Indian writer or just the one Indian anything or, you know, insert ethnicity, you know. I can't wait for the day where it doesn't become like a statement to have Indian content. And then also like I wanted to speak just really quickly because I know that this is also like internally for Disney. Like the reason that these like I want to call them like advisory boards on like racism and ableism and sexism and things like that. The reason that they exist is because like people have fucked up in the past and, you know, they needed to get reprimanded, but the best that they could do was put together like a committee. I totally get that. They need to, I think that their existence is fantastic and they need to keep that up. But if you hire the Indians, if you hire the disabled, if you hire BIPOCs, you know, like, then you kind of need those committees anymore to reprimand fools for all of that garbage. And I will say that they're one of the shows that I had worked on, we had gotten some talking tos about like some of the language that was in our outlines. Sorry, my child is like growling at me. And like kind of was like, yeah, you can't use this kind of language. And I'm like, well, I mean, I typically tend to call myself an Indian, and this character is going to call themselves an Indian, and that's okay because an Indian wrote it. But if some white dude came in here and was calling them Indians, then you can have that conversation with them. So just, you know, think about the checks and balances when it comes to that stuff. But also, as we've discussed here, put trust into the folks who are making it, who are from those communities.
Thank you.
I'll hit you too.
Won't be that.
Oh, just to, you know, just to echo everything that Erica and Bobby have said, and you've said, Bird, just, you know, we're so grateful. First of all, I'm going to speak to our allies. We're so grateful for you. And whoever's listening to this, it doesn't matter whether you're a PA right now or you're running a studio. We are so grateful that you're even spending the time to watch yet another Zoom, you know. Thank you, Lim, for that, because that means that something in your heart is moving you into, you know, into this community, into helping us tell our stories, which are good medicine. It is an antidote to the just virulent dehumanization and division that is sweeping through our land right now. I mean, our stories really are medicine and antidote to that. And so it is an important thing. It is larger than ourselves. Allies, don't be afraid to ask questions, to say, I don't know. It's okay to make a mistake. It's okay to make a mistake and then, you know, have one of us go, oh, you know, whatever that is. I just, one of my students today is non-binary, and it's like their pronouns get me every time. And so it's just like, please, you know, please forgive me, you know, just being able to ask for forgiveness and keep going, or saying, thank you for being patient with me. I'm learning, I'm growing, you know, I'm evolving. So please we don't expect you to, like, we're trying to figure out amongst ourselves, right, what decolonization means. So it's something that is decolonization. It's when we're doing it together. We're doing it as a tribe. And for those Indigenous makers that are out there, I just hope you feel so encouraged, you know, by looking at the screen and seeing folks like you. And I don't know, just again, you're feeling something. It's beyond just an intellectual understanding, but there is a pneumatic, energetic, spiritual understanding that, you know, things are changing and it's an exciting time to be a storyteller. And you have family here. You have a tribe here waiting to help you and to, you know, as Erica was saying, to foster you, you know, in with your dreams and with the stories that you want to tell. And I'm just, again, grateful for this circle.
Thank you. I want to say thank you, Erica, Bobby, Kimberly. Also, thank you to Disney and to our family and friends at IllumiNative, who again collaborated to create this guide. The time is now, the power of Native representation and entertainment. You can find it on the IllumiNative website, illuminative.org. And again, it's a guide for industry professionals on Native representation. Using the guide as a foundation, we hope to have an honest discussion on how we can continue to push the industry forward and supporting and creating more opportunities for Native creatives. So I thank everyone for being here. I hope that you have a good rest of your day and evening. Thank you. Yeah.